On a crisp October morning, Margaret Maggie Whitaker received an envelope containing $50,000 and a cryptic note in her late mother's handwriting. Don't tell anyone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. And now, enjoy the story. Margaret stared at the envelope on her kitchen table, its edges worn as if it had traveled a great distance. Inside were 50 crisp $100 bills and the cryptic note scrawled in handwriting that was unmistakably their mother's. Don't tell anyone. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the words with her fingertips. It wasn't just the money. It was the secrecy that unnerved her. Their mother, Ruth Whitaker, had lived modestly in the same creaky farmhouse for decades, sewing quilts to sell at church bazaars and tending to her vegetable garden. Where had this kind of wealth come from? And why would she leave it now, months after her passing, wrapped in such an air of mystery? Maggie picked up the phone and dialed Thomas's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly but familiar. "Tom," she said without preamble, "you need to come over. Something strange has happened." Thomas arrived within the hour, his old pickup truck rattling down Maggie's gravel driveway. At 72, he still carried himself with the easy charm of a man who'd spent his life charming people out of their doubts or their dollars. But today there was a flicker of unease in his hazel eyes as he stepped onto her porch. "What's going on, Maggie?" he asked, brushing a strand of gray hair off his forehead. "You sounded spooked." She led him inside and handed him the envelope. As he read the note, his brow furrowed. 50 grand? From Mom? This doesn't make any sense. "I know," Maggie said, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Mom never mentioned anything like this. Not once. She barely had enough to cover her medical bills, let alone stash away this kind of money." Thomas sank into one of the chairs at the table, tapping the edge of the envelope thoughtfully. "And what about the note? Don't tell anyone. Who's she trying to protect us from? Or is it someone else she didn't want finding out?" Maggie stopped pacing and looked at him sharply. Do you think Dad might have been involved somehow?" Their father, a shadowy figure in their childhood memories, had left when they were young, leaving behind only unanswered questions and whispered rumors. Could this be tied to him? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker? Thomas shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But whatever it is, we're not going to figure it out sitting here. We need answers. And I think we should start by talking to Lila Harper." Lila, their late mother's best friend, had been a constant presence throughout their childhood. If anyone knew Ruth's secrets, it would be her. Still, the thought of confronting her filled Maggie with apprehension. Secrets like these didn't stay buried without reason. As the siblings sat together in uneasy silence, the weight of the mystery settled heavily between them. For years they drifted apart, their relationship strained by Thomas's reckless choices and Maggie's rigid pragmatism. Now, though, they found themselves united by a shared curiosity and perhaps a shared fear. "Let's go see Lila tomorrow," Thomas finally said, standing up. "But remember what Mom wrote. No telling anyone else about this. Not yet." Maggie nodded, though her mind raced with doubts. Keeping quiet felt wrong, almost dangerous. Yet deep down she understood why their mother had insisted on secrecy. Some truths, once uncovered, could change everything, and not always for the better. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves against the windows. Autumn's beauty seemed tinged with foreboding now, as if the season itself sensed the storm brewing beneath the surface of their quiet lives. The drive to Lila Harper's house was quiet, the kind of silence that hums with unspoken words. Maggie sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Thomas's truck, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stole glances at him as he navigated the winding country roads, his profile softened by the golden afternoon light filtering through the trees. It had been years since they'd spent more than a few minutes together. After their father walked out when they were teenagers, the family fractured under the weight of grief and resentment. Ruth worked tirelessly to keep food on the table, but the absence of their father left an ache neither sibling could articulate. Over time, they took different paths, Maggie burying herself in schoolwork and teaching, seeking stability and order, while Thomas rebelled against the world, chasing fleeting highs and quick schemes. Now sitting beside him again, Maggie felt both comforted and unsettled. Comforted because despite everything, there was still something familiar about his presence. Unsettled because she wasn't sure how much of the brother she once knew remained beneath the layers of hard living and regret. "You don't have to do this, you know," Thomas said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, tinged with vulnerability. "If you'd rather handle it alone, I'll understand." Maggie turned to look at him, surprised. "What are you talking about?" "This," he gestured vaguely between them. "Us working together. I know we haven't exactly been close these past few years, or decades really. You've got every right to tell me to back off." For a moment, Maggie didn't respond. She studied his face, searching for some trace of the boy who used to tease her mercilessly, but would defend her fiercely if anyone else dared cross her. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried beneath years of poor decisions and missed opportunities. "I'm not doing this alone," she said finally, her tone firm but not unkind. "This, whatever it is, it involves both of us, whether we like it or not." Thomas let out a low chuckle, though it lacked humor. "Yeah, well, Mom always did have a way of making sure we couldn't ignore each other for too long." Maggie nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "She did." They fell silent again, but this time the space between them felt less tense, as if acknowledging their shared history had loosened some invisible knot. Still, the road ahead was uncertain, and the wounds of the past weren't so easily healed. When they arrived at Lila's house, a quaint cottage surrounded by wildflowers gone to seed, they found her sitting on the porch, knitting needles clicking rhythmically in her hands. At 84, Lila was sharp-witted and spry, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun atop her head. She looked up as they approached, her blue eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Well, well," she said, setting her knitting aside. "To what do I owe the pleasure of seeing the Whitaker siblings together? Must be important if you two are on speaking terms." Maggie exchanged a glance with Thomas before stepping forward. "We need to talk, Lila. About Mom." Lila's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. She motioned for them to sit, then leaned back in her chair, studying them with a mix of concern and wariness. "What's troubling you?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. Maggie hesitated, then pulled the envelope from her bag and handed it to Lila. "This showed up in my mailbox yesterday. $50,000 and a note from Mom telling us not to tell anyone." Lila's hands stilled as she examined the contents of the envelope. For a moment she said nothing, her gaze distant as if sifting through memories long buried. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, almost cautious. "Ruth always carried burdens no one else knew about," she said softly. "Some of them, I think, even she didn't fully understand." Thomas leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you know where this money came from, Lila? Did Mom ever mention anything like this to you?" Lila sighed, her knitting needles clinking faintly as she shifted in her chair. "There are things your mother confided in me over the years, things I promised I'd take to my grave. But now," she paused, her eyes meeting theirs with a mixture of sorrow and resolve, "maybe it's time those secrets saw the light of day." As Lila began to speak, the siblings listened intently, their bond growing stronger with each revelation. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was a key to unlocking the truth about their family's fractured past. And as painful as that truth might be, it was also a chance to heal wounds that had festered for far too long. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, carrying whispers of stories untold. Whatever lay ahead, Maggie and Thomas knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't face it alone. As Lila spoke, her voice carried them back to a time they had tried to forget, or at least bury beneath layers of adulthood and responsibility. The memories surfaced like fragments of an old photograph, faded but still vivid enough to stir emotions long suppressed. Maggie was 12, Thomas 14. They huddled together on the worn couch in their tiny living room, wrapped in threadbare blankets as the wind howled outside. Their mother, Ruth, sat at the kitchen table under the dim glow of a single bulb, scribbling numbers into a ledger while cradling the phone between her ear and shoulder. Her voice was hushed but tense, the kind of whisper that made Maggie's stomach knot with unease. "No, I can't do that. Not without risking everything, Ruth murmured, glancing toward the doorway as if afraid someone might overhear. I'll find another way. Thomas nudged Maggie, his eyes narrowed. Who do you think she's talking to? Maggie shrugged, though her heart raced. Probably Mrs. Harper again. She's always calling about something. But even then, they both knew it wasn't just idle chatter. Those late-night calls happened too often, always cloaked in secrecy. Sometimes Ruth would hang up abruptly, her face pale and drawn, and retreat to her bedroom for hours. Other times she'd emerge looking determined, clutching an envelope or a slip of paper that she quickly tucked away. Maybe it's Dad, Thomas whispered one night when Ruth thought they were asleep. His voice cracked with a mixture of hope and bitterness. Maybe he's finally coming back. Maggie rolled over in her bed, staring at the shadowy ceiling. He's not coming back, Tommy. He left us, remember? Thomas didn't respond, but the silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. Lila paused, watching the siblings closely as they absorbed her words. Your mother worked herself to the bone to give you two a decent life, she said gently. But there were complications, things she couldn't share with anyone, not even me. Maggie frowned, leaning forward. What kind of complications? Lila hesitated, her fingers absently smoothing the edge of the envelope. There were debts. Debts your father left behind when he disappeared. Debts that followed Ruth long after she should have been free of them. Debts? Thomas echoed, his brow furrowing. You mean like loans? Credit cards? Lila shook her head slowly. Not exactly. These weren't ordinary debts. They involved people who didn't play by the rules. Ruth had to make choices, difficult ones, to keep you two safe. Images flashed through Maggie's mind. Her mother slipping out of the house before dawn, returning hours later with dirt-streaked hands and circles under her eyes. The odd jobs she took on top of teaching elementary school, cleaning offices, mending clothes for neighbors, selling vegetables from their garden, and the whispered conversations, always tinged with urgency. She never said anything, Maggie murmured, more to herself than to Lila. All those years, she kept it all inside. That was Ruth, Lila replied softly. She believed in protecting her family at any cost, even if it meant carrying the weight alone. Thomas leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. So what does this money mean then? Is it payoff? Payback? Or is it some kind of trap? Lila's expression darkened. I don't know for sure, but I do know this. Your mother wanted you to have it, for reasons only she understood. Whatever else she was dealing with, she made sure this envelope reached you. It was summer, and the air smelled of ripe strawberries and fresh-cut grass. Maggie trailed behind her mother at the farmer's market, clutching a list of groceries they couldn't really afford. As Ruth negotiated prices with vendors, Maggie noticed a man lingering nearby, watching them intently. He wore a suit that looked out of place among the casual crowd, and his presence sent a shiver down her spine. Mom, she whispered, tugging at Ruth's sleeve. That man keeps looking at us. Ruth froze for a split second, her smile faltering. Then she turned to Maggie, her voice steady but firm. Don't worry about him, sweetheart. Just stay close to me. Later, as they walked home, Ruth stopped abruptly and handed Maggie the grocery bags. Go ahead, she said. I need to speak to someone for a moment. But do as I say, Maggie. There was steel in her tone, a rare edge that brooked no argument. Maggie obeyed reluctantly, dragging her feet as she moved out of earshot. From afar, she watched as Ruth approached the man in the suit. Their conversation was brief but intense. Ruth gestured animatedly, her face flushed with anger. When she rejoined Maggie moments later, her hands trembled slightly, but her expression was calm. Everything's fine, she assured her daughter, though her knuckles whitened around the strap of her purse. Maggie blinked, pulling herself out of the memory. There were times when I thought Mom was scared of something, or someone. I just never understood why. And now we're supposed to figure it out? Thomas asked, his voice tinged with frustration. 50 grand and a note telling us to keep our mouths shut. It's like she set us up to solve some puzzle she didn't have the guts to finish herself. It's not about solving a puzzle, Lila interjected sharply. It's about understanding who your mother was and what she sacrificed for you. That money isn't just cash, Thomas. It's part of her legacy. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Legacy. For years, Maggie had believed their mother's legacy was one of resilience and love, a quiet strength passed down through stories and lessons. Now, faced with evidence of secrets and struggles she'd never known, Maggie wondered if she truly understood her mother at all. Thomas stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch. Fine. Let's say we accept that Mom had her reasons. What do we do next? Do we sit here and wait for whoever sent this to come knocking? Or do we dig deeper? Maggie met his gaze, her resolve hardening. We dig. Because if Mom went to such lengths to leave this for us, it means there's something we need to know. Thomas nodded slowly, the old spark of determination flickering in his eyes. Then let's get to work. But we stick together on this, Maggie. No secrets between us. Not anymore. For the first time in years, Maggie felt a sense of unity with her brother, a fragile but undeniable connection forged in the crucible of shared pain and purpose. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, unraveling the threads of their past to uncover the truth hidden within. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering leaves across the yard. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored the fragility of their newfound alliance and the uncertainty of the journey they were about to embark upon. The next morning, Maggie and Thomas met at the local bank where their mother had kept her accounts. Armed with the power of attorney granted to them after Ruth's passing, they requested access to her financial records. What they uncovered left them both stunned. Ruth Whitaker hadn't just lived paycheck to paycheck. She'd maintained a second account unknown to anyone until now. The ledger showed decades of small but consistent cash deposits ranging from $200 to $1,000 at a time. Each entry was meticulously dated, yet there was no indication of where the money came from. No pay stubs, no explanations, just steady contributions that added up to nearly $60,000 before her death. Maggie flipped through the pages, her hands trembling slightly. How did Mom manage this without us knowing? Where would she even get this kind of money? Thomas leaned over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. Not where, who. Someone was giving it to her, or paying her off. For what? Maggie asked sharply, though the question hung unanswered between them. They stared at each other, the weight of suspicion settling heavily on their shoulders. Whatever Ruth had done to earn or receive this money, it wasn't something she felt comfortable sharing. Not with her children, not with anyone. Back at Maggie's house, they spread the documents across her dining table, searching for clues. But aside from the deposit slips, there was nothing concrete linking the funds to any source. No checks, no invoices, no correspondence. It was as if the money appeared out of thin air. This doesn't make sense, Maggie muttered, rubbing her temples. If Mom was working extra jobs or selling things, wouldn't there be some record, some proof? Unless she didn't want anyone to find proof, Thomas replied grimly. He tapped one of the deposit slips. These dates, they're too random. Look at this one. March 14th, 1987. That was right after Dad left. And here, November 3rd, 1995, the year I dropped out of college. Coincidence? Or was she getting paid to handle stuff? Handle what? Maggie snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. You think Mom was involved in something shady? She worked herself half to death raising us, Tom. You really believe she'd risk everything for, what, a few $1,000 here and there? I don't know what to believe, Thomas shot back, his voice rising. But we can't ignore the facts. Someone gave her money. For years, and she kept it hidden. Doesn't that tell you something? Before Maggie could respond, the phone rang, startling them both. She picked it up hesitantly, her stomach sinking when she heard Lila Harper's voice on the other end. Margaret, dear, I need to see you. Both of you. There's something else I should have told you yesterday. When they arrived at Lila's house later that afternoon, she ushered them inside with an uncharacteristic urgency. Her knitting needles lay abandoned on the coffee table, and her usually composed demeanor seemed frayed at the edges. It's about Evelyn Shaw, Lila began, her voice low. I didn't mention her before because I thought it might upset you, but now I think you deserve to know. Maggie exchanged a glance with Thomas. "Who is Evelyn Shaw?" she asked cautiously. Lila sighed, wringing her hands. "She was your mother's friend, a very close friend, back in the early days, before your father came into the picture. They grew up together in Ashford Hollow, inseparable well, until certain choices drove them apart." "What kind of choices?" Thomas pressed, leaning forward. Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say Evelyn wasn't always above board. She got mixed up with people who dealt in gray areas, morally speaking. Ruth tried to distance herself from all that once she married your father, but—" "But what?" Maggie demanded, her patience wearing thin. "But Evelyn never fully let go of her connection to Ruth. Even after all these years, she still showed up occasionally. At holidays, birthdays, funerals. Like last month, at your mother's service." Maggie froze, her breath catching. "Wait, Evelyn was at Mom's funeral? How did we not notice her?" "She stayed in the back," Lila explained. "Kept to herself. Didn't speak to anyone except me, and even then only briefly. She said she owed it to Ruth to pay her respects." Thomas frowned, his mind racing. "Why does that feel like more than just paying respects? Did she say anything else to you?" Lila shook her head, though unease flickered in her eyes. "Nothing specific, just cryptic remarks about unfinished business and debts being settled. At the time, I thought she was talking nonsense. Now—" She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. As they left Lila's house, the siblings were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but the picture they formed was far from clear. "If Evelyn knew Mom," Maggie finally said, breaking the silence, "then maybe she knows something about the money, about why Mom kept it secret. Or maybe she's the reason Mom needed to keep it secret," Thomas countered darkly. "What if she's the one who gave it to her?" "For what purpose?" Maggie challenged. "To protect her. To blackmail her. We're missing something big here, Tom. Something Mom didn't want us to find out." Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Then we'll start with Evelyn. If she's hiding something, we'll figure it out." Maggie hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at her. "And if we don't like what we uncover?" "Then we deal with it," Thomas said firmly. "Because whatever happened, it's part of our story now, whether we want it to be or not." The wind picked up again as they climbed into Thomas's truck, scattering leaves across the road. Somewhere in the shadows of their mother's past, answers awaited, but so did risks. For every step closer to the truth, they risked unraveling not only Ruth's legacy, but also the fragile bond they were rebuilding between them. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored the fragility of their quest, vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change. The morning sun filtered through the golden canopy of trees as Maggie and Thomas stood in front of Evelyn Shaw's address, a modest bungalow tucked at the edge of Ashford Hollow. The house was unassuming, its white paint peeling slightly, with flower boxes brimming with late-blooming chrysanthemums lining the windowsills. It looked like the home of any ordinary retiree, yet Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far from ordinary. "I don't know about this," Thomas muttered under his breath, shoving his hands into the pockets of his leather jacket. "What if she doesn't want to talk? Or worse, what if she knows more than we're ready for?" Maggie squared her shoulders, determination etched across her face. "We've come this far, Tom. We can't turn back now." She rang the doorbell, the sound echoing faintly inside. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman who could only be Evelyn Shaw. In her mid-80s, she carried herself with an air of quiet dignity, though there was a sharpness in her steel-gray eyes that hinted at a life lived on the fringes of convention. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore a simple cardigan over a blouse. But there was something magnetic about her presence, a mix of warmth and wariness that made it hard to read her intentions. "Well, well," Evelyn said, her lips curving into a faint smile. "If it isn't Ruth's children, I wondered when you come knocking." Evelyn invited them inside, gesturing toward a cozy sitting room filled with antique furniture and shelves lined with books. She moved slowly but deliberately, every motion measured. As they settled onto a threadbare couch, she studied them intently, her gaze lingering first on Maggie, then on Thomas. You look so much like your mother, Evelyn remarked softly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. And you, she turned to Thomas, her expression softening further. You have your father's charm, though I suspect you've inherited more from him than just looks. Thomas stiffened, but Maggie interjected quickly, steering the conversation away from dangerous territory. Ms. Shaw, call me Evelyn, she corrected gently, settling into an armchair opposite them. Evelyn, Maggie continued, we came because, well, we found something after Mom passed. Something she left behind. Money. And a note telling us not to tell anyone. Evelyn's eyebrows arched slightly, though she didn't seem entirely surprised. Ah, so she finally gave it to you. Took her long enough. What do you mean? Thomas asked sharply, leaning forward. Do you know where that money came from? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her cardigan. For a moment it seemed she might refuse to answer, but then she sighed deeply, resignation flickering in her eyes. Yes, she admitted quietly. I know exactly where it came from, and why Ruth kept it hidden all these years. As Evelyn began to speak, Maggie felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. How had she spent decades living alongside her mother without ever truly understanding her struggles? Ruth had always been a figure of strength and resilience in Maggie's eyes, someone who endured hardship with grace. But now, faced with evidence of secrets and sacrifices she'd never imagined, Maggie realized how little she actually knew about the woman who raised her. Her curiosity burned brighter with each word Evelyn spoke, driving her to dig deeper despite the unease gnawing at her gut. This wasn't just about solving a mystery, it was about reclaiming a piece of her mother's story, one she feared she'd taken for granted. And what about Dad? Maggie pressed, her voice tight with emotion. Was he involved in whatever happened? Evelyn exchanged a glance with Thomas before answering carefully. Your father, let's just say he opened doors neither he nor Ruth could close, doors that led to people and situations best left alone. When he left, Ruth was left to clean up the mess. Maggie swallowed hard, her mind racing. Had their father's abandonment been more than just cowardice or selfishness? Was there something darker beneath the surface? For Thomas, the decision to join Maggie in uncovering the truth was driven by conflicting motives. Part of him, the part that had always craved quick fixes and easy answers, was drawn to the prospect of claiming the inheritance for himself. $50,000 could solve a lot of problems, or at least buy him some time to sort out the mess his life had become. But another part of him, the part buried beneath years of regret and self-destructive behavior, recognized this as an opportunity to reconnect with his sister. He'd spent most of his adult life pushing people away, including Maggie, convinced he didn't deserve their love or forgiveness. Yet here she was, sitting beside him, willing to include him in this journey despite everything. He glanced at Maggie, catching the intensity in her gaze as she listened to Evelyn. There was no judgment in her expression, only a shared determination to understand their mother's past. It struck him then, this wasn't just about Ruth, it was about them too, about healing old wounds and rebuilding the bond they lost. You said Mom cleaned up the mess, Thomas said abruptly, breaking the silence. How? What did she do? Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression guarded. That's a complicated question, one I'm not sure I should answer. We deserve to know, Maggie insisted, her tone firm but respectful. Whatever it is, it's part of our family's history, our legacy. Evelyn studied them for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded slowly. Very well, but understand this. Once you hear the truth, there's no going back. Some secrets are better left buried, for everyone's sake. Maggie and Thomas exchanged a glance, silently agreeing to proceed. Whatever awaited them beyond this point, they would face it together. As Evelyn launched into her tale, the siblings listened intently, piecing together fragments of their mother's hidden world. Each revelation brought new questions and new doubts, but also a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices Ruth had made. The money wasn't just wealth, it was a symbol of survival, of choices made in desperation and hope. For Maggie, the investigation became a way to honor her mother's memory, to ensure that Ruth's struggles hadn't been in vain. For Thomas, it was a chance to rewrite his own story, to prove to himself and to Maggie that he could be trusted, that he could rise above the mistakes of his past. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying whispers of autumn's fleeting beauty. Inside, the weight of their family's secrets pressed down upon them, demanding resolution. Whether they emerged stronger or shattered remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the truths they uncovered would change them forever. The next day, Maggie and Thomas returned to Lila's cottage, their minds still reeling from Evelyn Shaw's cryptic warnings. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves as they climbed the steps to her porch. Lila greeted them with a knowing look, her knitting needles already clicking rhythmically in her lap. "I take it you spoke with Evelyn," she said without preamble, her sharp eyes studying their faces. Maggie nodded, sitting down across from her. "She told us some things, but not enough. We need to know more about Mom's life before she came back here. About Charles Alden." Lila sighed deeply, setting her knitting aside. For a moment she seemed lost in thought, her gaze drifting toward the window where the autumn sun filtered through the trees. Then with a heavy breath, she began to speak. "Your mother was young when she left Ashford Hollow. Barely 20, Lila started, her voice soft but steady. She moved to Boston hoping for a fresh start, chasing dreams bigger than this little town could offer. She found work as a secretary for Charles Alden, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city." Maggie leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What kind of man was he?" "He was charming, powerful, and dangerous," Lila replied, her tone tinged with warning. "Alden had a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. And your mother, well, she caught his attention almost immediately." Thomas frowned, crossing his arms. "Are you saying there was something between them? Like an affair?" Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There were rumors, yes. People whispered that Ruth wasn't just his secretary, that she was involved with him personally, but nothing was ever proven. Your mother never admitted anything to me or to anyone else as far as I know." "But why would people think that?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Was there evidence, or was it just gossip?" "It started with the way he treated her," Lila explained. "He gave her responsibilities beyond her role, took her to events where she didn't belong, showered her with gifts. And then there were the late nights at the office, the private meetings behind closed doors. It didn't take long for tongues to wag." "And Evelyn?" Thomas pressed. "Where does she fit into all this?" Lila's expression darkened, her fingers absently twisting the edge of her shawl. "Evelyn worked for Alden, too. At least that's what she claimed. Some say she was jealous of your mother, saw her as competition. Others believe they were working together on something illicit." "Illicit how?" Maggie demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What exactly are we talking about here?" Lila paused, clearly reluctant to continue. But seeing the determination in Maggie's eyes and the simmering curiosity in Thomas's, she relented. "There were whispers," she said finally, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might overhear, "about Alden using his business as a front for illegal activities. Money laundering, smuggling, even blackmail. No one could prove it, of course. He had connections everywhere, friends in high places who made sure the truth stayed buried." Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. "And Mom? Was she part of it?" "I don't know for certain," Lila admitted, shaking her head. "But I do know she left Boston suddenly without explanation. One day she was there, climbing the ranks and living a life most girls her age only dreamed of. The next, she was back in Ashford Hollow, pregnant with you two and alone." Thomas let out a low whistle, running a hand over his face. "So Dad shows up around the same time she leaves Alden. You think he knew something? That maybe he got tangled up in whatever Alden was doing?" "It's possible," Lila conceded. "Your father wasn't exactly forthcoming about his past either. All I know is that Ruth changed after coming home. She worked herself to the bone, kept to herself, and never mentioned Boston or Alden again. Not once." "What about Evelyn?" Maggie asked again, her mind racing. "If she was working for Alden too, did she follow Mom here? Is that why she showed up at the funeral?" Lila nodded slowly, her expression troubled. "Evelyn disappeared from Boston around the same time Ruth did. At first I thought it was just coincidence. But looking back now," she trailed off, her gaze distant. You think she came here to keep tabs on Mom? Thomas finished for her, his voice grim, to make sure she didn't talk. Or worse, Lila added softly, to remind her of what she owed. Maggie felt sick, her stomach churning as the implications sank in. If Evelyn had been sent by Alden, or worse, acting on her own agenda, it meant their mother hadn't truly escaped her old life. The money, the secrecy, the whispered phone calls, it all pointed to a web of lies and obligations that stretched far beyond Ashford Hollow. As they left Lila's house, the siblings walked in silence, each grappling with the weight of what they'd learned. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, forming a picture that was both clearer and more unsettling. So Mom worked for Alden, Thomas said finally, breaking the quiet. Maybe had an affair with him, or maybe just played along to survive. Either way, she got caught up in something dangerous. Dangerous enough to leave everything behind. And Evelyn followed her, Maggie added, her voice barely above a whisper. Either to protect her or to control her. Maybe both. They stopped at the edge of the driveway, staring out at the golden expanse of fields stretching toward the horizon. Autumn's beauty seemed almost cruel now, masking the shadows lurking beneath its surface. What do we do next? Thomas asked, turning to Maggie. We find out what happened in Boston, she replied firmly, her resolve hardening. We go there, track down anyone who might have known Mom or Alden. Whatever answers we're looking for, they're tied to that city. Thomas nodded slowly, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. And if we uncover something we can't fix, something that changes how we see Mom forever? Maggie met his gaze, her own filled with quiet determination. Then we deal with it, because the truth belongs to us now, whether we're ready for it or not. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the road like fragments of a forgotten story. Ahead lay Boston, a city steeped in secrets and shadows. Behind them remained Ashford Hollow, its charm and simplicity a stark contrast to the storm brewing within them. With every step closer to the truth, they risked unraveling not only their mother's legacy, but also the fragile bond they were fighting to rebuild. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored their journey, vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change. The calm of Ashford Hollow began to feel less like serenity and more like a fragile veneer masking something darker. As Maggie and Thomas delved deeper into their mother's past, the weight of their investigation seemed to ripple outward, drawing unwanted attention from forces they couldn't yet understand. It was late in the evening when Maggie returned to her house after a long day of teaching. The porch light flickered faintly as she climbed the steps, but otherwise everything appeared normal until she opened the door. Her heart sank immediately. The living room was in disarray, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, cushions overturned. Her breath caught as she stepped inside cautiously, gripping the baseball bat she kept by the door just in case. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" Silence greeted her. No intruder lingered. Whoever had broken in was already gone. But the chaos left behind sent a chill through her body. She moved slowly through the house, checking each room, her mind racing. Nothing seemed missing. The television, jewelry box, even her purse were untouched. Whatever the intruder had been searching for, it wasn't material wealth. As she surveyed the damage, her eyes landed on the dining table, where she'd left the envelope containing the $50,000 earlier that morning. It lay undisturbed, still tucked beneath a stack of bills and receipts. Whoever had broken in hadn't taken it, or hadn't known it was there. Maggie sank onto a chair, her hands shaking as she clutched the bat tightly. This wasn't random vandalism or theft. Someone knew what she and Thomas were doing, and they wanted to send a message. The next morning, Thomas met Maggie at a local diner, his face pale and drawn. He slid into the booth across from her, placing a crumpled letter on the table between them. "What is this?" Maggie asked, picking it up hesitantly. "Open it," he said grimly, his jaw clenched. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with 2 words scrawled in blocky handwriting. "Stop digging." Maggie stared at the note, her stomach churning. "When did you get this?" "This morning," Thomas replied. "It was slipped under my door while I was out feeding the horses. No return address, no signature, just this." "And you think it's connected to—" All of this? Maggie gestured vaguely toward the mess surrounding them. Thomas nodded sharply. Of course it is. Someone knows we're poking around, and they don't want us to keep going. But who? Maggie whispered, glancing around the nearly empty diner as if expecting someone to appear. Who would care enough to break into my house and threaten you? And why now, after all these years? Thomas leaned back in the booth, rubbing his temples. Maybe it's Evelyn, or maybe it's someone else entirely. Someone tied to Alden or whatever Mom got mixed up in back then. Maggie shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. This isn't making sense. If they didn't take anything from my house, and they didn't hurt either of us, what are they trying to accomplish? Are they just trying to scare us off? Or warn us, Thomas countered darkly. Maybe they know something we don't, something dangerous. Over coffee, they tried to piece together what the incidents might mean. The break-in at Maggie's suggested someone believed she had information, or evidence, that could expose them. The anonymous letter to Thomas hinted at intimidation, an attempt to halt their progress before they uncovered too much. Do you think Mom ever faced something like this? Maggie asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think she lived with this kind of fear every day? Thomas hesitated, his gaze distant. If she did, she never let on. Not to us, anyway. Maybe that's why she kept so much hidden, to protect us. Maggie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. I wish she'd trusted us enough to tell us the truth. Instead, we're stuck playing detective, chasing shadows of a life we barely recognize. Thomas reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. For once, there was no trace of sarcasm or bravado in his expression, only sincerity. We'll figure it out, Maggie. Together. Whatever Mom went through, whatever secrets she carried, we'll honor her by seeing this through. By the time they left the diner, the strange occurrences had ignited a fire within them, a mix of fear and determination that propelled them forward. They decided to accelerate their plans to visit Boston, convinced that answers lay buried in the city where their mother's story had begun. But as they prepared for the trip, unease lingered like a storm cloud overhead. The break-in at Maggie's house and the threatening letter to Thomas served as stark reminders that they weren't alone in their quest. Someone or something was watching, waiting, ready to strike if they pushed too far. That night, as Maggie locked her doors and double-checked the windows, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, scattering leaves across the yard. Autumn's beauty had turned eerie, its golden hues casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown. Ahead lay Boston, a city steeped in secrets and danger. Behind them remained Ashford Hollow, its quiet charm now marred by whispers of threats and warnings. With every step closer to the truth, they risked unraveling not only their mother's legacy, but also the fragile peace they'd fought so hard to rebuild. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored their journey, vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change and the specter of consequences yet unseen. The drive to Evelyn Shaw's house felt longer than it should have, the weight of anticipation pressing heavily on Maggie and Thomas. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding roads of Ashford Hollow. Each mile brought them closer to answers, but also to truths that might shatter everything they thought they knew about their mother. When they arrived, Evelyn greeted them with an air of resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment for years. Her sharp gray eyes softened slightly as she ushered them inside, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She led them to the same sitting room where they'd spoken before, but this time the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. "You've come far enough now," Evelyn began without preamble, settling into her armchair. "Far enough to deserve the whole truth." Maggie sat forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Then tell us, everything." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze distant as if recalling memories long buried. "Your mother, Ruth, wasn't just Charles Alden's secretary, she was his confidant, and eventually, his downfall. Ruth discovered what Alden was really doing," Evelyn continued, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was running a criminal empire under the guise of legitimacy. Embezzlement, fraud, blackmail. He had his fingers in every dirty pie imaginable. And your mother, unwittingly at first, became part of it all. Thomas frowned, leaning forward. How? What did Mom do? At first, she didn't know any better, Evelyn explained. She trusted him, believed in the image he presented to the world. But over time, she started noticing discrepancies. Missing funds, forged documents, late-night meetings with unsavory characters. When she confronted him, he dismissed her concerns, even threatened her subtly. But she didn't back down, Maggie interjected, her voice trembling with pride and disbelief. She kept digging. Evelyn nodded. Yes, Ruth was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She began documenting everything, keeping copies of incriminating files, recording conversations when she could. She knew the risks, but she couldn't turn away from the truth once she saw it. And you? Thomas asked sharply. Where were you in all of this? Evelyn hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. I worked for Alden too, at least at first, but I didn't have Ruth's courage. When she confided in me about what she'd uncovered, I urged her to stay quiet to protect herself. I thought we could both walk away unscathed if we played along. But Mom didn't listen, Maggie guessed, her voice soft but firm. No, she didn't, Evelyn admitted, admiration creeping into her tone. She gathered enough evidence to bring Alden down, or at least make him sweat. But when she tried to go to the authorities, things went sideways. What happened? Thomas demanded, his frustration palpable. Alden found out, Evelyn replied grimly. Someone tipped him off. Whether intentionally or accidentally, I'll never know. He cornered Ruth, accused her of betrayal. That's when she realized staying in Boston meant certain death, for herself and for anyone she cared about. So she ran, Maggie whispered, piecing it together. She changed her name, came back here, and started over. Yes, Evelyn confirmed. With my help, though not nearly enough of it. I arranged for her to leave quietly, provided her with new identification papers. It wasn't perfect, but it kept her alive. And Dad, Thomas pressed, was he involved in any of this? Evelyn sighed deeply, choosing her words carefully. He showed up shortly after Ruth returned to Ashford Hollow. Whether he stumbled upon her by chance or followed her deliberately, I don't know. But one thing is clear. He saw an opportunity, a vulnerable woman trying to rebuild her life. He used her, manipulated her, and left her holding the pieces when he finally walked out. Maggie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, anger and sorrow warring within her. Their father hadn't just abandoned them. He'd preyed on their mother's vulnerability, leaving her to face the consequences alone. And the money? Thomas asked, his voice tight. Where does that fit in? Evelyn met his gaze steadily. It's part of a settlement Alden paid to ensure Ruth's silence. Not out of generosity, mind you, out of fear. Once she fled Boston, he had no way of knowing how much evidence she still had or who else she might have shared it with. Paying her off was his way of keeping control. Maggie stared at the envelope containing the $50,000, which she'd brought with her, as if seeing it for the first time. So this isn't inheritance, it's hush money. In a sense, yes, Evelyn agreed, but it's also proof of Ruth's strength. She took that money and used it to build a life for you two, to give you stability and security despite everything she endured. She carried the burden of those secrets so you wouldn't have to. As Evelyn finished speaking, a heavy silence settled over the room. Maggie and Thomas exchanged a glance, each grappling with the enormity of what they'd learned. Their mother hadn't just been a victim of circumstance, she'd been a fighter, a survivor who sacrificed everything to protect her family. But Evelyn wasn't done yet. There was one final revelation waiting to be unveiled. There's something else you need to know, she said quietly, her expression somber. Something Ruth never told you because she wanted to shield you from the past. Maggie swallowed hard, bracing herself. What is it? Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles Alden. He's your biological father. The words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room and leaving behind a stunned silence. Maggie felt the blood drain from her face while Thomas rocked back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Our father... Thomas finally managed, his voice hoarse. That bastard? He's the reason Mom had to run? Evelyn nodded solemnly. Yes, and the reason she fought so hard to keep you safe. She loved you more than anything, and she refused to let Alden use you against her. As the reality of Evelyn's revelation sank in, Maggie and Thomas struggled to process the implications. Their mother's sacrifices took on a new dimension, her actions imbued with even greater urgency and love. Yet the knowledge that their father was a monster who had terrorized her cast a shadow over their understanding of their own identity. We can't let him win, Maggie said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. Whatever Mom did, whatever she suffered, it was to protect us. To honor her, we have to finish what she started. Thomas nodded slowly, determination hardening his features. Then we go to Boston. We confront Alden, expose the truth, for Mom and for ourselves. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, carrying whispers of the past into the crisp autumn air. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also the possibility of justice and closure. Whatever awaited them in Boston, they would face it together, bound by the legacy of a woman who had given everything to ensure their survival. The revelation about Charles Alden being their biological father hung heavy in the air, but Evelyn wasn't finished unraveling the tangled threads of Ruth Whitaker's past. As Maggie and Thomas absorbed the shock, Evelyn leaned forward in her chair, her expression grave. There's one more thing you need to understand, she said softly, her voice carrying an urgency that made both siblings sit up straighter. Ruth didn't bring Alden down alone. She had help, someone who worked alongside her, someone who knew the risks just as well as she did. Maggie's brow furrowed. Who? Who else was involved? Evelyn hesitated, her gaze shifting between them, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she sighed deeply and continued. That part of the story, it's complicated. Even now, I'm not entirely sure who this person is, or was. But what I do know is that they played a crucial role in gathering evidence against Alden. Without them, Ruth wouldn't have made it out alive. Thomas frowned, leaning forward. So there's another player in all of this? Someone Mom trusted enough to risk everything with? Yes, Evelyn confirmed. But here's the thing. They didn't vanish after Ruth left Boston. Whoever this person is, they stayed behind. And from what I've pieced together over the years, she paused, choosing her words carefully. And they might still be watching? Watching? Maggie echoed, her voice tight with unease. You mean us? Why would anyone care about us now, decades later? Because you're Ruth's children, Evelyn replied simply, her tone tinged with warning. And if Alden, or anyone tied to him, thinks you're digging into the past, they'll see it as a threat. This person, whoever they are, may have been keeping tabs on you for years, waiting to see if you'd uncovered the truth. Thomas let out a low whistle, running a hand over his face. So the break-in at Maggie's house, the anonymous letter I got, it wasn't random. It was a message from someone who knows exactly what we're doing. Evelyn nodded grimly. It's possible. Maybe they're trying to scare you off. Or maybe they're protecting you without wanting to show their hand. Protecting us? Maggie asked incredulously. By breaking into my house and threatening my brother? That doesn't sound like protection. It could be both, Evelyn countered quietly. Think about it. If this person helped your mother expose Alden, they've spent decades living under the radar too. They might not trust easily, and they certainly wouldn't want to draw attention to themselves by stepping forward openly. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine as she processed Evelyn's words. The idea that someone, a shadowy figure from their mother's past, had been silently observing them for years was unsettling, almost invasive. Yet it also raised new questions. Was this person a friend or foe, a guardian angel or a lurking predator? And you have no idea who this person is? Thomas pressed, his frustration evident. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Not for certain. Ruth only ever referred to them as the other side. She never gave me a name, never revealed anything concrete. All I know is that they were careful, meticulous even. Ruth trusted them completely, which tells me they were deeply invested in taking Alden down. Maggie exchanged a glance with Thomas, seeing the same mix of determination and apprehension reflected in his eyes. Whoever this mysterious ally was, they were now a key piece of the puzzle, one that couldn't be ignored. As they left Evelyn's house later that afternoon, the siblings walked in silence, each lost in thought. The golden hues of autumn seemed darker somehow, the shadows longer and sharper. The once familiar streets of Ashford Hollow now felt like a stage set for secrets waiting to unfold. "So what do we do?" Thomas finally asked, breaking the quiet. "Do we try to track down this other side? Or focus on Alden first?" "We can't ignore either lead," Maggie replied firmly. "If this person helped Mom, they might hold answers we desperately need. But we also can't delay confronting Alden. Not after everything we've learned." Thomas nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. "Then we split our efforts. You work on finding the mystery helper. I'll handle planning the trip to Boston. We'll reconvene before making any moves." Maggie hesitated, then agreed. "Just, be careful, Tom. Whoever's been sending those letters isn't playing games." "You too," he said, his voice softening. "If this person really has been watching us, they could strike again. Don't go anywhere alone." Back at Maggie's house, she sifted through old photographs and documents, searching for any clue that might point to the identity of their mother's mysterious ally. Meanwhile, Thomas began reaching out to contacts in Boston, testing the waters for information about Alden's current whereabouts and activities. Yet despite their efforts, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of paranoia through Maggie. Thomas, too, found himself glancing over his shoulder more often than usual, acutely aware that unseen eyes might be tracking his every move. That night, as Maggie locked her doors and drew the curtains tightly shut, she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, scattering leaves across the yard like fragments of a forgotten story. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored the fragility of their quest, vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change, and the specter of consequences yet unseen. Ahead lay Boston, a city steeped in secrets and danger. Behind them remained Ashford Hollow, its quiet charm marred by whispers of threats and warnings. With every step closer to the truth, they risked unraveling not only their mother's legacy, but also the fragile peace they'd fought so hard to rebuild. The tension between Maggie and Thomas grew palpable as they wrestled with the moral dilemma before them. Each revelation about their mother's past brought them closer to exposing Charles Alden's crimes, but it also deepened the rift in their approach to handling the truth. Their debates became heated, each sibling standing firmly on opposite sides of a line neither was willing to cross easily. Maggie paced the length of her living room, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "We can't just let this go, Tom. Mom risked everything to gather evidence against Alden. If we don't finish what she started, then all her sacrifices were for nothing." Thomas leaned back on the couch, his expression conflicted. "And what if exposing him puts us in danger? What if whoever's been sending those messages makes good on their threats? Mom kept quiet for a reason, to protect us. Are we really prepared to throw that away?" "She didn't stay silent because she wanted to," Maggie snapped, her voice rising. "She stayed silent because she had no choice. She changed her name, lived in fear, and carried this burden alone so we could have a chance at a normal life. But now we're adults. We can fight back. We owe it to her." Thomas rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You think I don't want justice for Mom?" "Of course I do, but you're not thinking about the cost, Maggie. Once we start digging, there's no turning back. Whoever's watching us isn't going to sit idly by while we tear open old wounds." "And maybe that's exactly why we need to do it," Maggie countered fiercely. "Because they're scared. Because the truth still matters, even after all these years." Their argument was interrupted by the sharp ring of Maggie's phone. She glanced at the screen, her stomach sinking, when she saw an unknown number flash across the display. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice trembled slightly. A low, distorted voice came through the speaker. "Stop poking around where you don't belong. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. For everyone's sake." The call ended abruptly, leaving behind a deafening silence. Maggie stared at the phone, her face pale. "Another message," she whispered, showing Thomas the blocked caller ID. He cursed under his breath, standing up abruptly. This is getting out of hand. They're not messing around anymore." "They never were," Maggie replied grimly. "Whoever this is, they've been planning this for years, waiting to see if we'd stumble onto the truth." Thomas ran a hand over his face, his mind racing. "If we keep pushing, we're walking straight into a trap. You realize that, right?" "And if we stop, we're letting Alden win," Maggie shot back. "Is that what you want? To let him get away with everything he did to Mom?" "No," Thomas admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "But I also don't want to lose you, or end up dead, because we underestimated how far someone will go to protect him." That night, as they sat together in uneasy silence, memories of their mother surfaced unbidden. Ruth Whitaker had always been a figure of quiet strength, a woman who endured hardship without complaint. Yet now, faced with evidence of the battles she'd fought and the fears she'd hidden, they began to see her in a new light. "What do you think Mom would have done?" Maggie asked softly, breaking the quiet. "If she were here now, knowing what we know, would she want us to expose Alden?" Thomas hesitated, staring at the envelope containing the $50,000 settlement money. "I think she'd want us safe above all else. But," he trailed off, his gaze distant, "she also believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Maybe that's why she left the money for us, not just as a gift, but as proof that she stood for something bigger than herself." Maggie nodded slowly, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "Then maybe honoring her isn't about keeping quiet. Maybe it's about finishing what she started, no matter how dangerous it might be." Despite their differences, a fragile consensus began to form between them. They couldn't ignore the threats looming over them, nor could they turn away from the truth their mother had worked so hard to uncover. Whatever path they chose, they would walk it together. "We'll proceed carefully," Maggie said finally, her voice steady despite the weight of uncertainty. "We'll find the other side, the person who helped Mom, and see what they know. Then we'll decide our next move." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "Agreed. But we stick together, no matter what. No more splitting up. No more taking unnecessary risks. Deal?" "Deal," Maggie replied, extending her hand. Thomas grasped it firmly, their shared resolve bridging the gap between them. As the days passed, the threats escalated. Anonymous letters arrived daily, each one more menacing than the last. One contained a single Polaroid photo of Maggie's house, taken from the edge of her property. Another bore a map of Boston with key locations circled in red ink, a clear warning that their every move was being monitored. Yet amidst the fear, a strange sense of clarity emerged. Whoever was watching them wasn't just trying to scare them off, they were testing their resolve. And with each passing day, Maggie and Thomas became more determined to prove they wouldn't back down. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, scattering leaves across the yard like fragments of a forgotten story. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored the fragility of their quest. Vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change and the specter of consequences yet unseen. Ahead lay Boston, a city steeped in secrets and danger. Behind them remained Ashford Hollow, its quiet charm marred by whispers of threats and warnings. With every step closer to the truth, they risked unraveling not only their mother's legacy, but also the fragile peace they'd fought so hard to rebuild. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within Maggie and Thomas as they gathered in Ruth Whitaker's attic, a space untouched since her passing. Dust motes floated lazily in the slanted light streaming through the small window, casting an ethereal glow over boxes filled with relics of their mother's life. Each item felt like a breadcrumb, leading them closer to understanding the woman she truly was. A woman far more complex than either sibling had ever imagined. Maggie opened a dusty shoebox tucked away in the corner, her fingers brushing against something soft yet brittle. She pulled out a leather-bound diary, its cover worn and cracked with age. Her breath caught as she recognized her mother's handwriting on the first page. "For my children, should I never find the words to tell you myself. Star." She exchanged a glance with Thomas, who leaned forward eagerly. Together they began reading, their hearts pounding as Ruth's voice came alive through the pages. March 14th, 1978. Today I made a choice, one that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Charles thinks he owns me, body and soul, But he doesn't know the strength I've found within myself. The evidence is growing, piece by piece, and soon it will be enough to bring him down. But at what cost? My freedom? My family? My very life? Star Maggie's hands trembled as she turned the next page, tears blurring her vision. April 3rd, 1979. If they knew what I carry, the secrets, the fear, they would see me differently. Not as Ruth, their mother or friend, but as someone capable of deception, betrayal. Yet all I have done is for love, for the hope of giving my children a future unburdened by his shadow. Thomas swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. She wasn't just scared, Maggie. She was terrified, but she kept going anyway. Maggie nodded, clutching the diary tightly. And she didn't do it alone. Look, she pointed to another entry. July 12th, 1979. Evelyn warned me again today to stay quiet, but I can't, not anymore. There are others helping me now, people willing to risk everything alongside me. Lila knows more than she lets on, though she pretends otherwise. And then there's him. He says we're doing the right thing, but I wonder if even he understands how deep this goes. Star. Him? Thomas echoed, frowning. Who's him? Before Maggie could respond, she reached into the box and pulled out another discovery, a faded photograph tucked between the diary's pages. It showed Ruth standing beside Lila Harper and none other than Charles Alden himself. All three wore smiles, though Ruth seemed strained, almost forced. In the background stood a fourth figure, partially obscured by shadows but unmistakably male. Maggie studied the photo intently, her mind racing. This changes everything, she whispered. Mom wasn't just working for Alden. She was tied to him in ways we never guessed. And whoever this man is, she gestured to the shadowy figure, he might be the other side, the person who helped her expose Alden. Thomas leaned closer, squinting at the image. Do you think Lila knows who he is? Or has she been hiding it all along? Maggie hesitated, torn between anger and curiosity. We need to ask her, confront her if we have to. Later that afternoon, they returned to Lila's house, the photograph clutched tightly in Maggie's hand. When Lila opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to unease as she took in their determined faces. What is it now? She asked cautiously, stepping aside to let them in. Maggie held up the photo without preamble. Who is this man, Lila? The one standing behind Mom and Alden? Lila froze, her knitting needles slipping from her lap. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the image. Then, with a heavy sigh, she sank into her chair, her shoulders sagging under the weight of decades-old secrets. That's Samuel Grayson, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He worked for Alden too, at least officially. Unofficially, he hated him, hated what Alden stood for, the lives he destroyed. And Mom trusted him? Thomas pressed, leaning forward. Yes, Lila replied softly. More than anyone else. Samuel was the one who taught her how to gather evidence, how to stay one step ahead of Alden's reach. Without him, she wouldn't have survived long enough to escape. But why didn't she tell us about him? Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Why keep him a secret? Because she feared for his safety, and yours, Lila explained, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Samuel disappeared shortly after Ruth left Boston. Some say Alden found out and silenced him. Others believe he went into hiding to protect himself, and those he cared about. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, Maggie and Thomas sat quietly, absorbing the magnitude of their discoveries. Their mother hadn't just been a victim of circumstance. She'd been a warrior, fighting battles they'd only begun to understand. Her diary revealed her fears and hopes, her doubts and triumphs, a portrait of courage painted in fragile ink. She gave us so much, Maggie murmured, cradling the diary in her lap. Not just her love, but her bravery, her determination to seek justice, no matter the cost. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression softened by sorrow and admiration. And now it's our turn to honor that legacy, to finish what she started. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, carrying whispers of autumn's fleeting beauty. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also the possibility of closure and redemption. Whatever awaited them in Boston, they would face it together, bound by the courage of a woman who had given everything to ensure their survival. The air was heavy with anticipation as Maggie and Thomas sat across from Lila Harper in her cozy sitting room. The photograph of Ruth, Charles Alden, and the shadowy figure, Samuel Grayson, lay on the coffee table between them, its edges worn from years of being hidden away. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she reached for it, her gaze lingering on the faces frozen in time. "You deserve to know everything," Lila began softly, her voice tinged with regret and resolve. "But once you hear it, there's no going back." Maggie leaned forward, her eyes locked on Lila's. "We're ready." "I wasn't just your mother's best friend," Lila admitted, her words slow but steady. "I was her partner, in every sense of the word. When Ruth discovered what Alden was doing, she came to me first. She knew I'd seen enough of his cruelty to understand why he needed to be stopped." Thomas frowned, leaning back in his chair. "So you helped her gather evidence? You were the other side Evelyn mentioned?" Lila nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes and no. I played my part, but so did Samuel. He was the one who taught us how to navigate Alden's world without getting caught. Together, the three of us built a case strong enough to make Alden panic." "And the settlement money?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling. "Was that part of the deal too?" Lila hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. "It wasn't just for Ruth. It was for both of us. We split it evenly, ensuring that neither family would suffer financially after everything we'd risked. It was supposed to be our way of securing peace, for ourselves and for you." Maggie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as the pieces fell into place. "That's why Mom left the note. Don't tell anyone. She wasn't just protecting herself, or us. She was protecting you." "Yes," Lila whispered, her voice breaking. "And now you see why I couldn't bring myself to tell you sooner. Every day since Ruth passed, I've carried the weight of this secret, wondering if I'd made the right choice, wondering if she'd have wanted you to know." As the full truth settled over them, Maggie and Thomas exchanged a glance, their shared understanding deepening. Their mother hadn't acted alone. She'd been supported by people who loved her fiercely enough to risk everything alongside her. And Lila, far from being merely a bystander, had been an integral part of the fight, a co-conspirator whose bravery matched Ruth's own. "She gave us more than we realized," Maggie said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "Not just the money, but the story behind it, a story of courage, friendship, and sacrifice." Thomas nodded slowly, his expression softened by admiration and sorrow. "And now it's up to us to decide what to do with it." After a long silence, Maggie turned to Thomas. "What if we let it rest? What if we honor Mom and Lila by keeping their secret safe?" Thomas raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely opposed. "You mean, not expose Alden? Not finish what they started?" "We can't undo the past," Maggie replied gently. "But we can choose how we move forward. Exposing Alden won't bring Mom back. It won't change what happened. But using the money to create something meaningful, that could be our way of honoring her legacy." Thomas considered this, his gaze drifting to the photograph on the table. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's do it your way. For Mom." With their decision made, Maggie and Thomas set to work transforming their childhood home into a community center for seniors, a place where Ashford Hollow's elders could gather, share stories, and find connection. They poured the $50,000 inheritance into renovations, restoring the creaky floors, painting the walls in warm hues, and filling the rooms with comfortable furniture and books. As the project neared completion, they invited Lila to visit. Standing in the newly renovated living room, surrounded by laughter and chatter during a trial event, Lila's eyes filled with tears. "This is beautiful," she murmured, clutching Maggie's hand tightly. "Ruth would be so proud of you both." Maggie smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "It's because of her, and you, that we're here. This place isn't just a tribute to Mom, it's a reminder of everything she stood for." courage, compassion, and community. Thomas stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder. And maybe someday, when we're old and gray, we'll sit right here and tell our grandkids about the brave women who came before us. Lila chuckled softly, wiping her tears. Just promise me one thing. Don't mention my name. Some secrets are better left buried. They all laughed, the sound mingling with the autumn breeze drifting through the open windows. Outside, the golden leaves danced in the wind, scattering across the yard like fragments of a forgotten story. Autumn's fleeting beauty mirrored their journey, vibrant, haunting, and tinged with the promise of change and the enduring power of love and forgiveness. In the end, Margaret and Thomas chose not to expose the truth, but to embrace it, letting it guide them toward healing and renewal. Their mother's legacy lived on, not in the shadows of the past, but in the light of the future they built together.